Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of Chin-Quee Chats, the bitesized podcast where we talk movies, sports, and everything in between. I'm your host Matthew Chin-Quee, and this week I'm dialing back once more, no guest again, just because kind of getting back in the transition of school and whatnot, moving 6 hours from where I spent the last 4 months back home, back to school, so didn't really want to, throw any guests in there and trying to figure out schedules because just trying to get back into the routine of things. So it's just going to be a more relaxing episode, probably a little bit shorter this week. Don't have too many pressing things to talk about. Just, some stuff that has just popped in my mind, some of the things that that I have seen this week or just found interesting. So in the cinema chat, we're going to talk about, just my love for Disney and the whole Pixar, and really focusing on Pixar because I did watch a documentary, which I highly recommend, called The Pixar Story, which kind of talks about the whole creation of Pixar. And then that in turn reminded me of a few months ago, I had drafted an article about Bob Iger, the current CEO of Disney, and how he is like one of my idols, not even just in the business world. I'm a business student, but not even just in the business world, but as someone who loves film and as someone who's grown up and loved Disney. So I really want to just talk about that. And then in the free chat, talk a little bit about baseball and the Jays. It is September. We suck, but future is looking kind of bright. The Indians are on a 17-game winning streak. The Dodgers suck again. So I'll talk about that. So without any further ado, let's get right into the cinema chat. So the cinema chat this week, as I said before, I really wanted to talk about the just my love for Pixar, my love for Disney. Now, I'm sure I've talked about it before. I'm not actually 100% sure if I talked about it in an episode that I've released, but I do know that in an unreleased episode, one of my test episodes, that actually I don't think anybody has heard because it is not very good. I still have it saved. Maybe I'll release it sometime, but it's not very good. Just talk about, my favorite things. I was trying to do like an Oprah sort of thing. And I talked about my love for Lion King and Tarzan, two films that I grew up with. And I don't think there is anybody who didn't grow up at least a little with some exposure to any Disney property, and most of all Pixar. And Pixar, which didn't start off as a Disney property but has always had ties back to Disney. And the reason why I want to talk about them is because I saw a really interesting documentary called The Pixar Story just a couple days ago, and it basically highlighted the creation of Pixar, the history from way back in I believe it was the 80s. Now I'm not very good with dates. I'm not 100% sure, even though I just watched this a few days ago. I believe it was in the 80s where they started to where they started to venture into the world of computer like CGI animation, computer animation, rather than the traditional 2D hand drawn animation, but going from that to the computers and all the way until it was bought up by Disney in 2006, and it was released right before, I believe, Ratatouille came out in 2007. So it's a little bit behind now, and I'm sure that if they updated a little bit, you would get a lot more insight into, Bob Iger's relationship with it, John Lasseter's continued relationship with the company as basically its leader, and his relationship with Disney, and just how they've grown and continued to up the game with CG animation, as well as the resurgence, or not, I shouldn't say resurgence, but because it didn't really exist, but the almost takeover of CG animation in the animated world of in the world of animated movies. Like, you barely see any 2D animated films anymore. You have stuff like Your Name or The Red Turtle, or My Life is Zucchini, which are 2D animation and stop motion. Oh, and of course, Cool with the Two Strings by Leica. You have studios like that, but those are the smaller studios, like the studios like DreamWorks, Illumination, Pixar, obviously. They have really transitioned into computer graphics animations, the almost 3D looking characters, rather than the 2D the 2D hand drawn stuff that we had been used to almost since well, not almost, since the beginning of animated films and animated television and animated media, since the very beginning. And Pixar, in so many ways, was the pioneer of this whole computer generated animation movement. The popularity that it has in the industry, in the animated film industry, definitely wouldn't exist without John Lasseter, the CEO, the founder, the creator of Pixar, and the guy who really put everything on the line to push the technologies forward. The guy who, from the documentary that I watched, I learned that he to complete the I believe it was for Toy Story, maybe it was for the short films that Pixar had started with, but from the very beginning he had a bed under his desk. He would leave notes for his secretary and say, "Wake me up in the morning as soon as you come in." He would sleep at the office and go straight back to animating, straight back to a technology where computers weren't exactly prevalent in a modern office yet. They weren't very prevalent in the film world yet, and he was pushing the technology, trying to find new ways, because he really believed in the art of creating animated movies or creating animated media with CG, and he put everything on the line. And he's, quite frankly, one of the hardest working people in the industry. Well, speaking as if I know him, but just from what I've learned from this documentary, it's actually very quite incredible from what he did. And it's not all him. It's from this documentary I learned that it's a combination of everyone we see now in Pixar, people whose name we recognize, from Pete Docter, who just did Inside Out, and he had done I believe it was Monsters Inc., to Andrew Stanton, who did Finding Nemo, and I believe he did Finding Dory, but he's one of the bigger names in Pixar as well. And these guys were the very first hires that Pixar had done, to even Steve Jobs, who I knew was involved in the creation of Pixar, but I didn't know that he was the main financer. And he was losing $1 million a year for 5 years, in the first 5 years of Pixar's creation. He was losing $5 million. He lost $5 million as a whole. That's a lot of money. I mean, even for a guy who was as rich as Steve Jobs, that's a lot to put on the line for something that, for a new venture, a new creation that hasn't been proven yet, doesn't really exist, and nothing else really exists like, and you don't know if audiences are really going to pick it up. And the whole studio and the whole history behind it is really quite fascinating, and it's an anomaly. It's something that's quite historical, because a studio that I've never seen. I can't think off the top of my head, and even with research, which you guys know I don't do any research on this podcast, but I'm sure if you guys looked it up, no studio has come out with such a big bang like that. They had 10 films that were all critically acclaimed, that all did well financially, that were all hits. And they had a perfect record, and some people to this day will argue that they have a perfect record. Now, I'll point to Cars 2 and Brave as films that aren't great, but I believe Brave made money. Brave still got nominated for, and I believe won, the best animated feature at the Oscars. And that might have been just, oh yeah, it's Pixar, so we'll just nominate it and it'll win immediately. But and Cars 2, nobody likes that movie, not even the Academy or critics, but it made a bunch of money, and Cars 3 really picked it up, and that was actually a pretty decent movie, and that made a lot of money as well. So Pixar is a studio that they legitimately cannot be stopped. Now, people might say they're running out of ideas now. They're only doing sequels. They've done Monsters University, Toy Story, the upcoming Toy Story 4, Incredibles 2, which is really the only sequel that anybody has been asking for in the Pixar universe. But, they still have Coco coming out. They did The Good Dinosaur, which was so-so, but it was an original story from Pixar. They did Inside Out, and who knows what they have in the future. They have a good enough track record where maybe you can say they've started to run out of ideas, but judging in the past and knowing the history behind Pixar, I highly doubt that Lasseter is going to let the company drive itself into the ground and just become a company that's just made for profits. Now, of course, all studios are there. They're businesses. They're made to make money. But Pixar, in and of itself, always started as a creative venture, as something where the animators and Lasseter wanted to really explore the boundaries of the technology and really explore what they could do. And I believe that they're going to keep pushing those boundaries, keep finding new ways to up the ante and animation, and keep interesting stories going. And another person who's not going to let Pixar drive itself into the ground, and I'm by no means saying that they are, by the way. It's just, some people are thinking that, and the amount of sequels, stuff I've just talked about. But anyways, another person who won't let Pixar be drove into the ground is Bob Iger, and he's the CEO of Disney. So for those who aren't exactly in the know or really invested into the whole corporate structure of Disney, and now this is kind of sounding like one of my business lectures, but trust me, it is pretty interesting. Just the sheer amount of work that this guy has done, and how he brought Disney back from making movies like Home on the Range, or why is this name escaping me? Meet the Robinsons. I almost said Flushed Away, but that is not a Disney film. But what a lot of people don't realize is Disney, after the Disney Renaissance, which ended with Tarzan in 1999, from there until 2006, where Bob Iger took over, and Michael Eisner was CEO from the 2000s to 2006, Disney was not in a very good place. Now, that's relatively speaking. They're never going to be like one of those startup businesses that really isn't doing well. They're still a huge multinational, multi-billion dollar. I wouldn't be surprised if they're $1 trillion, studio business. But Eisner wasn't exactly doing the best job with them, and there's even threats of the Disney family leaving, like Roy Disney. I believe he is Walt Disney's nephew, maybe. Not 100% sure on that. I think he's still alive. You can check him out. But he was kind of the Disney family's representative in the company, and he held one of the high positions in the company. He had threatened to leave, and he was going to leave when Eisner was still the CEO. And then Bob Iger came in, and he was kind of a homegrown guy. He had worked with a bunch of other studios before, but he came in and he basically righted the ship, and now Disney is that powerhouse you see today. Disney is back with the animated films, the ones you see like Princess and the Frog or Tangled, or even the biggest animated film that has come out in the past few years, Frozen, and then of course Moana that just came out, and that's just talking about Disney proper. Now Bob Iger, going back to the Pixar thing, he organized or kind of led the discussion with John Lasseter to rehire Lasseter, because he worked for Disney in the past. He had worked on The Brave Little Toaster and Fox and the Hound, stuff like that, way back when, before he had established Pixar. And he negotiated another contract with the company and brought Pixar into the fold. Then a few years later, he had negotiated with Kevin Feige, or I don't think Feige was actually leading the Marvel brand at that point, but he had negotiated with the Marvel people, brought Marvel in and started the MCU as we know it today, the world's biggest franchise, other than this next one that he helped organize in 2011, I believe, where he organized got into discussions with George Lucas, and then got Lucasfilm under the Disney brand, and from 2006 until now, and that's 11 years, he has exponentially grown Disney. Like, Disney is huge again. They're the biggest studio on the planet. They've gotten to the point where people, when things get really popular and people start to hate it, that's the point that Disney's gotten. They print their own money, man. And well, they literally print their own money. They have something like called mouse bucks or something like that. I remember reading it, but they print money. They're getting so big where they are going up to Netflix and saying, hey, we don't need you anymore. We're going to make our own streaming service, and people are going to buy it because we're just streaming our movies, and people will buy it because you have people like me who grew up on films of the Disney Renaissance. You have people like the generation older than me who grew up on some of the older films. You have newer fans of Disney from the new Disney princess movies, or you have Marvel fans, you have Star Wars fans, you have Pixar fans. Everyone's a Pixar fan, right? Bob Iger he has led Disney from being one of the middle pack studios in the early 2000s, bringing them back from those dark ages, and now they're the biggest film studio on the planet. And one day, if anybody from Disney is listening to this, I want to work for you guys. Obviously, this is not being paid. It's not sponsored in any way by Disney, but I can just wanted to say how much I love that company and how much I respect it. Now, that doesn't mean I like all their decisions. I'm not 100% sure what's going on with Star Wars right now. The whole thing's a mess. Probably talk about it once more news about episode 9 comes out. But for the most part, Disney can do no wrong in my eyes, knowing their history, knowing their leadership. And I trust their leadership. And I hope that Bob Iger doesn't leave. And now he said that he was going to leave. He just wanted to retire, I believe, or his contract was over or something like that. One of those things. And I hope that he doesn't, because I'm not sure who can replace him. I sure as hell hope it's not Ike Perlmutter, because he's another one of those bad apples in the company that I don't think would be healthy for him to lead. Although he is sticking mostly to Marvel, I don't think any of the people who are leading the divisions like Lasseter, Feige, or Kathleen Kennedy, I don't think they should really be leading the company as a whole, because they're very good in their own respective division. But the fact that I can't name a single person within the Disney hierarchy right now off the top of my head, and I know the Disney hierarchy relatively well, I think that speaks kind of volumes to how good Bob Iger has done, and the fact that I've just been rambling on about the Disney CEO. I can name the CEOs of some of the other companies, but I can't really speak to their accomplishments because not to insult them, they don't have the same accomplishments as Iger. They don't. He's a phenomenal leader. So I hope I get to meet him someday. But that just about wraps up the cinema chat for today. I told you it would be a little bit shorter because one can only rant and ramble about and rave about Disney for so long. And as much as I love them, there's not much more to say other than hire me. So I'm going to take a quick break. We're going to talk about baseball for a bit. I'm going to talk about prospects and win streaks and playoff outlooks and everything about that. So we'll be right back. Okay, I'm back for the free chat segment. Now it's not going to be very long. Just going to talk a little bit about baseball. The season is winding down. We're in September, and for baseball fans, that means it's roster expansion time. For non-baseball fans, that just means that normally you get a 25-man roster, I believe, and so that means you can have people who are called up from the minor leagues back and forth. As long as they're on your 25 man roster, they can be called up or put down as many times as the rules. There are other various rules with this. The baseball rules are, I mean, they're ridiculous. There's a whole rule book that is just insane. Pretty sure the rule book in that, the Fairly Odd Parents rule book where it's like that rules and it's like gigantic, it's like bigger than people's heads. It's like that. That's the baseball rule book. But anyways, in September, your roster expands and you can call up more prospects, people who you have drafted, players that you have drafted before who have been sitting in the minor leagues and playing their own leagues, developing, getting better, and you can bring them up to the big leagues and really give them a shot. Now, what this really helps with is for teams who are struggling and who are not in the playoff race, you can rest your good guys so that you don't want to risk injury for next year because you aren't making the playoffs or likely won't. Teams like my Blue Jays, who have had a really bad season, but September represents something, a little silver lining because we get to see some great prospects. I can't speak too much as to the other prospects in the other organizations because that takes a lot of work. I mean, it takes a lot of work just to keep track of the prospects within the J systems, and I don't even know about all of them. But I just want to, so I can't really comment on the other prospects. I mean, I know some of the really bigger ones like Derek Fisher or Jan Mankota. I think I'm actually know that he might. Oh, man, see. Baseball is so big, it's hard to keep track of all the players. I'm pretty sure Jan Mankota is actually a big leaguer already, and I'm just an idiot. But anyways, Derek Fisher, he's not a basketball player. Well, he is a basketball player, but he also is an Astros prospect who's been called up, and he is one of their most highly touted ones. But Jays have been slowly calling up our prospects, so people like, I believe his name is Richard Urena. I know his last name is Urena. And he is a shortstop, I believe, and he is really good. He's a young guy. He's shown some great defensive flashes out in the field already. We called him up in September 1st, I believe, the very first day we could. And he has been basically our starting shortstop now for September because, I mean, we don't really have anybody else. We have Goins and Barney, but don't really want to risk injury on them, or they've been playing a lot, and you really want to give someone like Urena his time to shine because he is a prospect. This is invaluable experience for him in the future when we're going to need him full-time as a major leaguer in the future. You have people like Teoscar Hernandez, who coincidentally actually came from the Astros in a trade with Francisco Liriano at the trade deadline. So we're bringing up all these prospects, and they're really looking really good. And another one that really stands out is Carlos Ramirez, who was an outfielder, and now he's a pitcher who just seems to be almost automatic, better than Osuna has been the past few weeks. I mean, what's going on with Osuna? Not 100% sure. It could be those mental issues, those anxiety issues that he was dealing with earlier this season, or it could maybe be an injury, or maybe he's just tired. I'm not exactly sure why some Jays fans are giving up on him. This dude's 22 and he's given us 36 saves on the season already. That's pretty impressive. Even if he has blown the league leading amount of saves, he does also have, I think it's like top 5 maybe saves in the entire league, at least in the American League. So he's still a really great pitcher, and he's still really young and under our control for a long time. So I don't know why you're giving up on him, people, but And then you have the really big prospects, and these guys, they won't be called up. They're way too young. They're way too raw right now. But Vlad Guerrero and Bo Bichette, basically any Jays fan right now, that's who we're looking at. We're not looking at Bautista and Donaldson anymore, and Donaldson is still very good. He's having a down season, but he was also injured. I think he's actually injured again. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't really been following the Jays recently as much. Um, I feel like that kind of pains me almost as a bandwagon fan. I have been keeping track of their scores, but I also don't have cable up here at school, so it's pretty hard to find. Well, it's a lot more effort than I'm willing to put in just because of how bad we are right now. But keeping track of the prospects is really cool. But anyways, Bo Bichette and Vlad Guerrero Jr., they are some of the league's best prospects, not even just the Jays' best prospects, like in the entire league. They're that good. So the future's looking bright. Who knows? A lot of people have been pointing to about 5 years ago when we had a bunch of prospects who were really looking good, and they kind of all just flopped. So here's hoping that these prospects won't flop. I mean, Mark Shapiro built up the Cleveland Indians, who are now on a 17-game win streak. He built them. So maybe in a few years we can be like them, going to the World Series. They did blow a 3-1 lead, but they made it to the World Series, and now they're looking pretty damn good in their own right this season. So who knows? But that just about wraps my free chat segment, the baseball talk, and perhaps this episode. Now, sorry if it's a little bit short this week. I'm gonna try to have a guest on next week to I have no idea what I'm talking about next week. Maybe there'll be some big news, but I'll probably have a guest on next week and try to make a longer episode to make it up to you guys. But once again, if you made it this far, thank you for listening. You guys can check out me on social media at CQ_chats or my personal Twitter, mchinquee96, where you can see me yelling about other stuff other than baseball or movies or just, life. Don't forget to check out the Geek Pulse Radio iTunes network, which is featuring tons of great new shows, such as the Sports Wars or the actual gaming show, and of course the staple, the Geek Pulse Radio News, featuring Chris Clow, Chris Kubiak, and Jonathan Youngblood. So make sure to check them out. Make sure to check out the whole network, because it's featuring some amazing talent, other than me, of course. But anyways, other than that, that's about it. And I will chat with you guys next week.